let's talk about radiation first. Okay, I think that's first up there. Yeah, radiation is up there first. And what I'm talking about is the radiation, the heat that you feel. Notice that I'm not over the flame. I'm not in the convection. I'm next to it, and I can feel the radiation from it. And pretty soon I'm going to feel the radiation in the other flame. Now, interestingly enough, I like matches. This is how I ended up in this field, by the way. Now I can do it legitimately. When I was a kid, it wasn't. But anyway, the interesting thing about that is the flame, all that big flame that we saw in the video, do you know this, it's the same temperature as this match? When you walk in to your fireplace, and I mean, I'm not getting very much heat off of this, okay? I have to get very close before I can really feel very much heat at all. But what's interesting about this is that this match flame is the same temperature, within the same temperature range as all those big flames. Why do we call that hot and this not? Well, we know this is hot. All you have to do is hang on to it too long and you know that it's hot. But the point that I'm getting across here is that it's the big flames that transfers a lot of the thermal heat to you, to your structure. And oh, by the way, your structure, a wood-sided wall, can take more heat than you can. So actually, it's better to be inside your house, not outside your house during one of these events, okay? Especially, I mean, unless it's got a flammable roof, and that's probably not a good idea. But the point that I'm getting across is that the bigger the flame wall that you've got, the more of that radiant energy that's going to transfer, the more likely you're going to get ignition. So oh, and by the way, the further away it is, the less radiation you get also for a given size of flame. So notice, I mean, we sort of come upon something here. That means that we need to get big flames further away from the structure. And if we do have some flammables next to the structure, we want to make sure that we isolate them so that they're more like a match than a big crown fire. Okay? So it's not the temperature, it's how big the flames are. And we want to reduce the size of those flames. Okay? Well, we got another one here. We got convection. We got another mechanism, right? Okay, so radiation is basically, we got a fire out there and it's radiating to us through space. Okay? Space being, where we live, our atmosphere. So it's radiating to us, we're getting hot that way. Okay? Convection, we have to be in the convective stream. We've got to be in the hot gases. Okay? And by the way, I'm further away from the flame than I was there, and my hand's getting a lot hotter. So from that standpoint, the idea is we don't want to be in a convective stream, right? So in other words, if you've got fire down below you, you want to do something to keep yourself out of the convection. And oh, by the way, flames touching your structure is a really bad idea. Okay? That probably goes without saying, but how many of you have junipers right next to your house? Okay, how many of you have, and also, oh, by the way, one of the things that I came across in a fire in 1985 was a structure that had a rock wall. I mean, it was beautiful. It was unattended, as it turns out, but what happened was that a small amount of flame from some dry grass was next to the deck posts. And it was close enough to where the stairs were that it was able to catch the corners of the stairs on fire, where the geometry was very, very good for maintaining the fire. First glowing and then flaming. And that structure basically burned down from just a very small, actually a manageable ignition had somebody been there. So flame, which is part of the convection, is something that you don't want to touch the structure. you also don't want the convection column to touch your structure for two reasons. One, it heats the structure up. Well, the convection column that is not part of the glowing flame that you see is not really hot enough to catch your structure on fire. But there's all kinds of stuff in that convection column, all kinds of burning embers in that convection column that'll come up. That's this part. Now, as it turns out, you and me are very susceptible to radiation, thermal radiation, and convection. Okay, the structure actually is less susceptible than we are. Okay, to the point of where any radiation exposure that would create an ignition on a wood wall in 5 minutes will kill us in 1. Okay? So your structure is actually more sustainable than you are to the first two. Okay, the problem is with firebrands is, and by the way, this is all part of our perception. This is how we view, we view big flames as being the threat. And we don't think too much about firebrands because firebrands don't affect us all that much. Oh yeah, maybe we get one down our collar and we yelp for a moment. But by and large, we don't perceive it as a threat. What firebrands do for a structure is it's not one firebrand, it's many. And the bottom line with firebrands is that they light from the vegetation and then they fly. And the more ignitable, the more likely it is to start something on fire. And we don't get one firebrand. We get a shower of firebrands that collect in every little nook and cranny of that structure. Why is a wood roof, a flammable wood roof, I should say, let me just say flammable roof, so that I don't get in big trouble with the wood roof industry. It not only is flammable, but it also has a lot of surface area and cracks and crevices to where these firebrands can get driven up underneath. What we're talking about is the opportunity in all these nooks and crannies of the structure for an ignition that we don't by and large see. That's where design materials come in of the structure. The idea is that the more flammable your materials, the less nooks and crannies you want. And what I'm talking about, I don't know how else to put this notion of places where firebrands can land. Collect, not just land, but collect. My favorite story is I was on one incident in Southern California, and they had a rather artistic, old-style door lock on the front door. The one, where the skeleton key goes in and you can peek through. Okay, well, when we went into the structure, this was one that survived, obviously. There was a pile of ash on the other side of that, where ash and burning embers had gone through. The reason we know they were burning embers is because it made a tar mark on the inside of the floor, at the tile floor where it landed. Okay, like a cigarette stain. So just visualize that in terms of leaving your windows open, leaving doors open, like in an evacuation. I mean, I've seen this before. People evacuate and leave the doors open. Garage doors, back doors, front doors. These are all places where firebrands can go. Initially, a manageable ignition on the interior, but unattended can burn the structure down. Let me mention that in highly ignitable structures, for example, structures that have flammable roofs, I have also seen where an engine company was unable to deal with the multitude of ignitions that started during a severe condition. We're not talking about calm like it is right now. We're talking about 40, 50 mile an hour winds where you can't get the water delivery to the structure. And just visualize Spokane, 60-mile-an-hour winds. That's the norm when you lose lots of structures. And it can happen here. From the research that I've been doing, both from a modeling standpoint, computer modeling, as well as doing laboratory tests, the one thing that I've found is that radiation and convection, by and large, can be easily managed. They can be easily managed by creating areas where you've thinned. You can create, from a radiation standpoint, you can create obstacles with hardwoods. You can create obstacles to the radiation from a major crown fire by thinning. And you can get the fire away. You can also create, even if the fire comes and torches out, what I mean is it catches the canopy on fire of the trees that you've thinned, those are less massive than a wall of flame. The convection is also, basically you get the vegetation, the large flames away from the structure. You can create a rock wall that's an obstacle to convection. You set your house back, does two things. Keeps you out of the convection current of the fire, and it also serves as an obstacle. If you're set back and the fire's down here, you can't see it. If you can't see it, the radiation doesn't get there. So through the research that I've been doing, I found that radiation and convection ignition sources are more easily managed than firebrands, because the firebrands are coming from a ways away. If you modify the vegetation out a quarter of a mile, that's short-range spotting in one of these events. Remember what I said about Panorama. The fire was still almost a mile away when it spotted into the subdivision, 3 blocks inside. So we're talking about firebrands, which means that now there's not a whole lot that we can do about the firebranding except in the materials and design of our structure, which means that we want to make sure we don't have firewood piles. By the way, every firewood pile in Patty Canyon caught on fire, at least within my area of experience. So the things that firebrands catch on fire, you want those away from the structure. And you want to make sure that you don't have refuse collecting in the various places under your decks. And oh, by the way, anything that's flammable is connected to your structure. Consider it your structure. Fences, burn houses down if they're flammable wood fences. And board fences always have stuff on the other side that we don't care about because we don't see it. And so all of those things, think like a fire. Fires don't think, so that gives you an advantage. The one thing I'd like to mention before I quit is one of the things that we don't do very well, and why this problem, I consider this problem largely a social problem. We've got technology right now to create a number of options for us in how to deal with this problem, how to manage this problem. The key is being able to utilize those options in a way that serves our interests and our desires. And I'm talking about the homeowner at this point. Probably the only way that we can deal with this is if we change our relationship with our fire protection agencies. All too often when I go to meetings, and I hear this from fire protection agencies on one side, and I hear it also from homeowners on the other, they both have one thing in common. They both view the homeowner as a victim. And they both view the fire protection agency as the rescuer. Now, that to some extent works in the classic urban situation where you have something happen, you know, your barbecue lights the wall on fire and it slowly starts burning on the wall. You call 911, the fire department comes out and they put it out with some degree of damage. Wildland-urban interface situation is very, very different because of the multiple structure involvement and the overwhelming of the agencies, of the fire protection capabilities. At this point, you can't consider yourself a victim. You've got to consider yourself a participant. And the reason is sustainability. The point is that we all have an interest in sustaining our structures and being able to manage wildland fire. And at this point, I don't think there's any place for posturing and taking positions with regard to, I'm a taxpayer, I'm a victim, you better do something for me. Similar to the woman that was basically, she was stating a position, not an interest. She was stating a position to the governor. She was saying, I'm a taxpayer, you've got 911, I called 911, where the hell were you? I'm a victim. She was taking a position, and it didn't do anything for her house. Because physical reality doesn't care about positions. So I guess the pitch that I'm making is that probably the biggest thing that we need to change, probably 80% of this problem, is in viewing ourselves not as victims, but as participants, and then trying to engage in as many ways as possible the professional services. And by the way, most fire services are not prepared for this kind of relationship. It's just not there. So there's going to have to be some change on both sides, but both sides are going to have to initially, in order for progress to be made, in my opinion, both sides are going to have to start viewing themselves as interested parties engaged in solving this problem, not as rescuers, victims, we, they kinds of positions. And I'll leave it at that. And I will stick around for questions. I want to be a resource. Alan or Matt? I can't remember.
Thanks, Jack.
I have not given this talk. I think those fellows have given it numerous times. What first thing I want to talk about is the whys and why not do fire suppression around your house in an urban interface area. And I think you heard all the reasons of why you should do that from these two gentlemen. I want to talk about the why nots. Just from what I've heard from people in the past. The first one, I've kind of listed these. The first one is looks. We've all seen the logging clear cuts, the logging jobs that are less than, well, they're commercial forest logging where they take all the big trees, leave all the scrub trees, and they scar everything. There's slash piles, there's skid trails. Nobody wants that next to their house. And I think that is one of the major stumbling blocks for people to think about doing some thinning and logging near their house. Another one is expense. How much is this going to cost me? Although in the past, or in the last few years, we've been able to help out because the stumpage prices, the prices you can sell some of the logs for, has risen dramatically in this part of the country. But it's still an expense, and everybody's concerned that, you know, I don't have the money, but my experience was that you can log it for no cost. You get enough stumpage or wood off the property in order to be able to pay for the logging. Another one is inconvenience. You think about logging going on next to your house, you've got chainsaws, you've got tractors, you've got dust, you've got noise. But that's a temporary issue, and it only lasts for a couple of weeks or a month, depending on the size of your acreage. Another one is the wildlife. What happens if you do extensive logging in your woodlot or around your house? You're going to change the wildlife. You're going to change the habitat. And in our house, we happen to be next to a elk and deer winter range, so we're only taking and doing a significant amount of clearing next to the house, and where we're farther away from the house, we're pretty much leaving it as is. Another one is required supervision. I'm going to tell you a little story. My mother owns a cabin on Flathead Lake, and her neighbor did some logging. He had about a 4-acre tract of land with lakeshore frontage, and it rose up on this little bench, and on the bench there was a bunch of fir and pine. He hired a local logger to do a little thinning for him. Well, to make a long story short, the logger got in there, clear cut almost everything, and once a tree is cut, it's cut. I mean, there's nothing you can do with it. And to make it worse, he went broke on the project, left a slash on the ground. The homeowner never got paid for the trees. I mean, it's just a horror story. I mean, you can. I think that is a detriment to people thinking about wanting to do this. What happens if I pick the wrong guy? What happens if he doesn't do the job I like? And if I turn my back and I'm gone for one day and he cuts the wrong tree, there's nothing you can do about it. And I think the last reason is that a lot of people move to the urban wildlife interface to live in the country amongst the trees, and they don't want it's a lifestyle they've always wanted. A big ponderosa pine or a fir tree right next to your house. And this is why I moved into this area, and this is why I want to live here, so I'm not going to cut the tree down. I think that my experience is that you can retain most of that quality of lifestyle and still do a lot to preserve feeling and do a lot to protect your house from wildfire. And with that, I'm keeping this real short. I've got about 7 slides, and you'll turn the lights down. Where is it? I'll have to apologize for the slides I took for myself the other day. This is a before picture of the area of the acreage that I own. This was taken about 2 days ago. Shows a dense understory, lots of ladder fuel. A crown fire would probably run right through this property. This is another picture taken from about the same angle, one uphill and one down the hill. It shows this is the area we left for deer and elk winter habitat. Just on the other side of this hill is an open grass range, which the elk feed south facing. This is more north and east. South facing where the elk winter feed, and they come in the upper story to make that. This is every homeowner's worst nightmare, the logging operation, the slash piles, the brush. These are taken during the logging operation. And this is what everybody's afraid of, is what my backyard's going to look like. This picture, this was logged last fall, and the slash was burned early in the spring. You can see a small burn pile there. This is about 100 yards from the house. This was logged late in the fall. This area was logged early in the spring last year. It was thinned by about 30 or 40%. You can see now it's full of lupin, mock orange, 9-bark. It looks like it's everything logged. This is interesting. This is a skid trail last fall.
I'm actually really glad that Alan went before me. I think he brought up a couple of pretty good points, one of which I'm going to have to correct John a little bit. I'm not a logger. I'm actually a forester. I have a bachelor's degree and I'm getting a master's degree in forestry, and I think that that is one of the reasons why some of the things that I do might be a little different than what somebody else might do. Also, the things that I'm going to show you tonight, most of the time we're not done for the same reasons that normal logging is done. We did these for fire hazard reduction reasons. We did them for forest health reasons. We did them for a lot of reasons other than just making income. And that's what most of the logging that you see on the land most of the time is for making income. And that's really not the objective of the jobs that I normally do. And so that's a pretty big distinction, I think, that needs to be made between normal logging that you see on the land and what we're talking about doing. And it all plays into who you pick to do it and how much supervision you have to provide and some of those kinds of things. I think it's important to really look at some of the work that somebody's done before you hire them to get on your place. And I think you should be there most of the time. You should be helping to choose trees and those kinds of things. With that, I guess I will go to the slides. And a lot of these first slides are from Alan's place, and I'll talk about some of the same things that Alan did, and I'll try to expand on those things.
Slide.
Yeah, my slides are a little better. I think I probably used a little faster speed zone so that on those dark days it shows up a little better. I learned that. I'm going to show you the kinds of things that I do, some of the things that I do in my business. It all depends on what the landowner's objectives are. I'm going to show you some different kinds of things, some different kinds of stands, and if anybody has any questions during the presentation, please ask. I just do this from the slides, so I don't have anything to look at here, so I might miss it. This is a, yes. Oh, yes. This is a slide of, it's basically a before slide from Alan's. It shows the dent stand, Douglas fir. There's quite a bit on the ground underneath there, and it's pretty dense. This is another one. This is up away from the house where he is leaving it dense for animal hiding cover. Here's another one. And here you can see in the foreground, it looks like there's quite a bit of slash on the ground there, and there is. That is post-harvest, pre-burn, pre-piling, before we did anything other than cut the trees down and skid them out. And as you'll notice, you can't see the stumps very well. We try to cut our stumps as low as possible. That way, they're hidden. Turn around and then you can't see them. That's one of the things that we try to do to minimize the visual impacts of doing some kind of a treatment or harvest. Here you can see we've got hand piles out through there. Alan showed some of those. I do not make machine piles. I do not drag all the materials down and make a big landing because I don't like to make a mess a big mess in one big spot. I would rather leave the nutrients out on the forest floor and burn them in little piles. Here's some more. Now these are pretty good sized piles for hand piles, but there was a lot of slash in this area. You can see that some of the dead stuff is picked up and thrown in there that was already on the ground, not all of it. Now this is looking down out of the forest into the field. I think that for the most part the piles have been burned, picked up as we're going to make it. Sometimes the landowners will go through and pick up more of the stuff off the ground, but for the most part we've reduced the fuel to the point where we're not too worried about it. This shows something that we've done for that would be different probably than you would do in a commercial harvest. This is a tree that we wanted to leave because we wanted to leave a pretty dense spacing, but it had some mistletoe on it, so we just reached up and cut the mistletoe off. We have not removed all of the mistletoe out of this stand. We tried to reduce it, but in some cases we just left mistletoe because this is not a commercial stand where we're trying to grow timber. We're just trying to reduce the fuels and make the forest as healthy as possible while doing that. Was there a question? Okay. You'll see that we did leave some young Doug fir in some patches. That is a fire hazard, but we tried not to leave too much of that. But we leave some of it for some diversity. That can always be cut down later or left, thinned, any one of those options. But out in the forest, we weren't too concerned about removing all of the fuels. Another thing that we've done in this stand is you'll notice the trees that we've left it's still pretty dense. And one of the reasons for doing that is that I don't want to thin it too quickly. Then it's, if you thin quickly, the stand is more prone to blow down from wind, maybe more prone to snow breakage. And so we want to do this kind of in a slow process. Maybe at some point we'll want to open this up a little more as the trees get bigger, but we're going to leave it pretty dense at this point for those reasons, as well as we want to keep as many overstory trees as we can so we don't get as much of that young Doug fir coming in the understory, because that is a fire hazard. And that's something we'll have to go back later if we do get a lot of that, and we'll have to burn it, remove it mechanically, probably by cutting it down with a chainsaw, throw it in a pile. And that's a lot of work. It's a lot easier to leave the larger trees dense enough, but far enough apart that they're healthy so their crowns expand, and hopefully we'll be able to keep those young trees from getting enough light and water and those kinds of things to get started underneath that stand. I think that's something that gets missed a lot when people are doing more commercial type harvest, because in commercial harvesting, the fire hazard doesn't matter that much. Here's just another picture. You can see down in here, we did have a burn pile. We had, looks like a stump was underneath that. That's going to be black for a little while, but it won't take too long and that'll be gone. Another thing we did in this area, you can see if you look way down here, there's a road. We went ahead and left it pretty dense along the road there, just kind of an extra visual screen. Another thing that we're doing to mitigate some of the changes that we're making from doing thinning. This is pretty close to one of the same photos that Alan had. You can see that the understory looks pretty nice under there. This is another photo. The piles have been burned. There still is some woody fuel on the ground, but not that much. Some of the small critters like those things, and we don't clean all of that stuff up. Excuse me? No, that is Douglas fir here in the front, and then I believe that's a larch back there, and right back here is ponderosa. So no, there really aren't any lodgepole to speak of in that stand. That's ponderosa pine type with larch, and Douglas fir wet ponderosa pine type. This shows you some stumps. We cut some smaller trees out from this big ponderosa pine, always trying to leave the biggest, best trees for many reasons, most of which because those are the ones that are nice to look at. They're the healthiest, so they're going to be less prone to wind throw, snow breakage, insect damage, all those kinds of things. And those are things that are important to keep in mind when you're doing a residential type job, because we want this to be a healthy forest. We want to be able to look out the window or walk out in the forest and see that tree. We don't want something to happen to it, so we're going to leave the best of them that we can. One of the problems with that is that tree's worth the most money. So if I was looking to make money, that would be the tree I'd want to cut down. Other than cutting all these little trees, I have the next picture. I think if you look carefully here, you can see there's all kinds of stumps in here. A lot of them are really small, smaller than any of the trees that are left. And so if you think back to what those photos looked like beforehand, we cut a lot of small wood out of here, and that stuff's a pain to deal with. It's not worth any money most of the time, so it costs you money to get it out of there. But if you're going to make it look like this and get the benefits that go with it, that's what you have to do. And so even though we probably removed, I don't know, 15 loads of logs, maybe even 20, including the pulp out of here, Alan didn't make any money on this deal. But he got the job done this way. It met his objectives, and it didn't cost him anything either. So those are all some things that are different than conventional harvesting. Now, oftentimes, depending on the situation, especially if the landowner wants to do a lot of the piling and that kind of thing, we can do a job like this and still make them money. But then they're paying themselves to do some piling. If they have a lot of big trees, sometimes they can make money even without doing work. But most of the time, the objective is not to make money. It's to do other things, and if some money is made, then that's great. This shows you a skid trail that we probably took a few loads of logs down. You can see that it's a little beat out, but this is probably the worst spot on this whole skid trail. And I took this photo about a month ago, and I went back and looked at it. It looks a lot better than this. I think I even have another photo. One of the reasons this looks different than the skid trail that Alan had shown earlier is the overstory in this case is a lot more dense. So there's a lot less on the ground, a lot less plants on the ground to begin with in this one spot. Yeah, here's what it looks like down below there, and a little later on. You really can't tell. This is another project that I worked on. You can see this is a much different stand. This is all ponderosa pine, and these are very, very small old trees. They're suppressed, is what we like to call trees like this. They're probably only 30 feet high, but they're about 80 years old. This is a dry site. This is at Hayes Creek. And we're looking across the fence onto the Forest Service side. From the private side, you can see that fence post there. That's what this area did look like. That's behind me when I'm taking this photo before the thinning. Yeah. Because they're this dense. There are so many trees in that spot competing for water, light. They're barely alive is really what the case is. They're just barely hanging on because there are so few resources for them because there are so many trees in that one spot. Good question, yeah.
Matt, what do you do with trees like that? Do you have to just chop them up into 10-foot lengths and burn them, or do you haul them off and ship them? Or?
Actually, in this case, there was a pulp market, and it was just during the time when the pulp market was going crazy. So we were able to send even stuff like this to the pulp mill, and that really helped in this situation. Unfortunately, the pulp market has never been that high before, and it probably won't be that high again for a long time. So it makes a job like this a lot more costly at this to do right now, or probably even in the near future. But we were able to send most of this stuff for pulp. We did burn some of it, but most of it went for pulp. Yeah.
Another reason that trees like this can be suppressed is that there's a really high outcropping from the main trees of sedimentary rock. There's not much in there for them to grow.
As far as soil.
Right.
Yes, that's very true. That's very true. It's a harsh site. It's dry. Yeah, the soil's very thin. It's amazing to me that it can even support that many trees and keep them alive. This is another photo looking into the Forest Service. This was taken this spring. It looks a little greener, but I thought it would be good to show what that looks like because I'm going to be showing what the rest of this looks like this spring, and it wouldn't be quite fair to show a summer shot of that and then show a spring shot on the site that we worked on. Here's one more photo looking in. Now this is post harvest but pre-burn. You can see there's quite a bit of slash around in there. Not a whole lot because the crowns on these trees are very thin. You can see those trees have very few branches on them, very little foliage. So even though we probably removed, oh boy, I don't know, 70% of the stems out of there, there really isn't that much slash because they aren't very big. Here's another picture before the burn, but after thinning. There's another one. You can see the Forest Service on the other side of the fence there. You can see slash in the foreground. You can see all those stumps. We removed a lot of trees out of there. Here is the fire. We did a broadcast burn on this site to, well, for quite a number of reasons, but one was because that was a good way to get rid of a fair amount of the fuel. The landowner has since gone around and done some more piling to remove more of them. And after this burn, we did seeding of native grasses. I'm working with the botanist on that. So this was a pretty big project where we dealt with more than just the trees. Here's another photo of the broadcast burn. Now this is 1 year after the burn. And you can see that there's quite a bit more in the understory here than there was before. And that real fine grass you see is a lot of it that we planted. Here's another photo. It would have been pretty spotty for a real long time because there was very little in the understory in a lot of this. So we felt like it would make a lot of sense to really help push things along. Another problem is that a lot of the grass that was in there was cheatgrass. And probably a little bit of this that you're seeing here is cheatgrass, but we actually killed a lot of that with the fire. Now that's kind of an experimental thing, and there's going to be more study of the plots to see if that works. I don't want to give the impression that every fire will kill cheatgrass because I don't think that's the case at all. It appears that maybe spring burning at the right time will, but the botanist is looking at those kinds of things right now. You can see here, this was actually one of our skid trails, and the grass came in really well on that skid trail. That's just another one of those things that happens. The grass has come in real well in other spots too, but that's what one of our skid trails looked like. I don't think that there are very many commercial harvesting operations that could have done a job like this and made it look this way. We were barely fit through these trees, and we were very careful. I don't think you'd notice in any of these slides that we scarred any trees. There are probably a few trees in there that were scarred, but they're small scars, and we try very hard not to do those kinds of things. So that as soon as we're done and gone and the grass and the shrubs grow up over the stumps, you can forget that we were even there. Now this is what we'd like this site to look like further down the road. You can see these trees are a lot bigger. This is on the same site, but it's farther out, more toward the opening of the canyon, and for some reason it didn't grow as dense out there, so the trees were a lot bigger, and it was never as dense, so the grass and the understory is a lot healthier. We did not burn that. This is another photo. We actually did work in this area, but a lot of these bigger trees, they were already there. That opening was there. We didn't affect that. But this is what we're hoping the understory is going to look like. This is the tractor that I use for the work that I do. It's four-wheel drive. You can't really see the front wheel there, but it has fairly large front wheels on it. It's four-wheel drive, like I said. So it really works much like a skidder. It can handle the same sort of terrain. It can handle fairly rough ground. I haven't found any places that we haven't been able to do one way or another, that, as long as they were reasonable, not extremely steep. but we've done a lot of stuff that I don't think people would expect could be done with a farm tractor. The reason that I like to use a farm tractor is because it's much smaller than a skidder. And the other reason is because the way this winch setup works. You can see here that I'm pulling in a few logs at a time, and then I can hook them onto the back and have my cable free again. So I can do thinning a lot more efficiently and with a lot less impact as some of the more conventional systems, because my cable can always be free again. With a conventional system, you need to get all your logs in line. You need to pretty much get them all in one shot. It's difficult to pull in a few logs and then pull ahead and get them from a different area, just because of the way the system works. This system works very well for that. Most of the time, we don't pull more than 1 or 2 logs into the machine at one time, because I have one over here, one out here. Then maybe I might pull ahead and grab a few more up in front of me. And this way, the cable's free to do that without damaging a lot of the residual trees. This is the stand. This is actually at my parents' house. This has been thinned this same way that we've been talking about for about, well, it's actually over 20 years. And I think that the photo is actually taken from the house. So you can see that the fuels have been reduced significantly around the house. The trees are very healthy. Most of the time, we don't have very many problems in the stand with blowdown, wind breakage, or snow breakage, or beetles. There used to be a lot of problems in the stand before it was thinned, but now it's pretty healthy and it really doesn't have those problems. I think it's very aesthetically pleasing, and it sustainably removes a few loads of logs every year off about 60 acres. So this is the kind of thing that we're shooting for in the long term on a lot of these projects that we do, if that's what the landowner desires. Now, I'm not saying that every place people would want it this open. Of course, there are different forest types, but this is the ponderosa, dry ponderosa pine type, and this is something that we can strive for if that's what the landowner wants. It takes time. It's kind of a slow process. You have to enter the stand a few different times to do this. It's not something that you can probably go in and do in one shot, but I think that's something that I'd like to shoot for on my own property. That looks a lot nicer than mine. So I guess that is everything that I had. If there were any more questions, I'd take those. Yeah.
What problems have you run into, or have you not run into them with knapweed coming into your skidding trails and so on, where you disturb the ground?
I haven't had very much problem with that, because most of the time we're removing small amounts of wood over a skid trail and the natives grow back in, like you saw there. You do have some problems with that if you remove a large amount of wood over a skid trail. Another thing that can help bring the knapweed in is if you work under wet conditions, the soils are wet, really tear things up. That's another thing that just won't do if it rain. Well, you know, like the last week or so, we haven't skidded any logs because it's been too wet. So that's another thing that we try to do doing low impact harvesting, is to try to mitigate those kinds of things, is not skid when it's wet. I normally don't have much trouble with that. I'm not going to say that it might not, if there's knapweed at the bottom of the trail and we have a pretty heavily used skid trail, it might go up that. But those are the kinds of things where normally the landowner would do this, but someone goes back the next year and plucks those plants out that have maybe made their way a little bit up that trail and maybe seed it. I've done a little bit of seeding. Most of the time it's not necessary, but you can do some seeding to try to mitigate those things. So that's another case where it's not just a one-time thing. You don't just do it, walk away, and forget about it. It's kind of an ongoing thing. You got to go back and check. Maybe we did. We try very hard not to drive through knapweed and carry it up into the stand, try to keep the machine clean, those kinds of things. But I'm not saying that it can't happen, and that's another reason why, especially the landowner needs to go back and be checking these things out. We do some of that, but I can't babysit the whole, the whole place unless that was really the plan from the beginning. But we try to mitigate those things and don't have very much problem with it most of the time because we don't remove that much volume.
Do you have some solution or equipment for removing dense fir, small stems that are, the trees are maybe 3 feet high, 4 feet high, but pretty dense?
Yeah.
Or is the only way to do that is to burn it?
No, that's not the only way. Lots of times we take a chainsaw, or they also make a small, I don't have one of these because my chainsaw is a long enough bar that you just pretty much walk around and knock them down. They have like a real big weed eater. You can go through and thin those areas. And that way you can thin them, you don't have to use fire, you can leave some of them, and then just normally hand pile and burn those things. So there is a way to do that. It is pretty time consuming, and if you're paying someone to do it, if they're paying comp and all those kinds of things, then it's fairly expensive. But the landowner can do those kinds of things really easily. That's the kind of thing that you can go out and do an hour or two at a time, and if you keep at it, you can get it done fairly quickly. It's really not a big strain. And those are the kinds of things that we try to get the landowner to do most of the time.
But I'd like to just introduce you to the Forest Stewardship Workshop. I've heard a lot of terms mentioned this evening, things like healthy forest. What is a healthy forest? I've heard terms like, do you have objectives for your property? Do you have objectives for your property? And what are objectives for your property? I've heard the term mistletoe. I've heard wet ponderosa pine forest types, dry ponderosa pine forest types. If those kind of questions or if those kind of comments are things you don't understand and you own forest land, I'd suggest that you consider joining us for the Forest Stewardship Workshop. There are some brochures that describe that workshop. I'm wearing and carrying some of the equipment that you'll use in the workshop to actually go out and discover your own forest for yourself and begin to understand what some of these terms are that are used when we describe forests. If you're interested in people who can help you do things on your forest, people like Matt Arno, this little handout is available free of charge. And there's a topic here called home wildfire protection. And several people are in the business of helping you do that. So why don't you take one of these? They'll be up here. There's some other literature back on the table that describes more about the Forest Stewardship Workshop. I'm with the Extension Service, and we're here to provide educational opportunities for the owners of forest land. I wonder, there's always someone in an audience like this who may have taken the Forest Stewardship Workshop. Is there anybody here? Well, good, a couple. Maybe these people can help tell you a little bit about their experience taking the workshop, and maybe they can tell you a little bit about whether or not you should do it. But that's all I have to say. I'll be at the table there answering any of your questions if you'd like. Matt.
I just want to say real quickly that when we work with landowners that have taken the stewardship course, they're almost always a lot more knowledgeable. They understand things a lot better. I think it's a really good course. If you're interested in learning more about your forest, it's a really good idea.
Thanks very much.